There was a man at the edge of the prairie whose land held more sky than soil. His house, timbered and low, sat alone beneath that endless blue, shoulders hunched like it braced against the weight of its own stillness. The wind had carved songs through the boards, soft and mournful, like the place remembered laughter, but hadn't heard it in some time. He was called Sam by those who remembered his name, though few did now. Folks in town said he came from the war with a face that no longer fit laughter, said he built fences to keep his land his own, tall and wire-tight, running like stitched scars across the hills. He planted posts in frozen ground with hands that had forgotten gentleness. He mended them in silence even when no cattle wandered near, as though keeping the world out was a full-time trade. There was a gate, though, just one, set on the eastern boundary where the morning light touched the fence first. The latch was always unhooked. No one ever asked him why. He lived quiet, rode out with the sun and came back when it lowered itself into the western rim, mended saddles, split logs, cooked over flame. The rooms of his house were clean but barren. A coat still hung by the door, though it hadn't been worn in years. A second plate sat in the cupboard, untouched but polished, the way someone might keep a chair open at the table long after a guest has gone. Spring came late that year, all mud and bluebells. Snow clung to the shadowed hollows, unwilling to let go. Sam watched it thaw from his porch, boots planted firm on the boards he'd sanded bare with pacing. He'd grown used to the hush of the land, to the soft breath of horses and the creak of gate hinges. He didn't expect company. He hadn't in 5 years. But that morning, he saw movement near the fence line. At first, he thought it a coyote or mule deer, something light-footed and half-starved. He squinted through the morning haze, hand lifting slow to shade his brow. The figure paused by the open gate, one hand resting on the post as if it asked permission. A woman. Her coat was threadbare, dust rising at her hem. She carried a bundle on her back, something wrapped in wool, too small to be gear. He didn't move. She stepped through. Not quickly, not boldly, but like someone who'd walked far enough to know that turning back hurt worse than what lay ahead. He watched her cross the field with the wariness of a man used to ghosts. She didn't flinch beneath his gaze, just kept walking, each step careful but steady. When she reached the porch, she didn't speak. She lowered the bundle, carefully, like it was something sacred, and straightened her shoulders. Her face bore the kind of quiet ruin he recognized. "I need a place," she said, "just for a little while." Sam looked at her hands, chapped, bleeding at the knuckles. He looked at the bundle. A child, maybe, wrapped tight against the cold. He hadn't spoken aloud in days, but his voice came easy, rusted though it was. "There's a spare room," he said. She nodded, a breath escaped her lips, not quite relief, closer to surrender. That night the wind shifted. It carried the scent of hearth smoke and something else, bread baking, a lullaby hummed low. And for the first time in a long while, the house did not feel empty. The woman's name was Mara. She said it quiet, without ceremony, while laying kindling into the hearth as if saying it too loud might scatter her here like ash. Sam didn't ask where she'd come from, nor what had sent her walking across the wide-bellied plains with a child bound to her back and no horse to carry them. He figured if she stayed long enough, the silence between them would tell him more than questions could. The child, a girl not yet 2, answered to the name Wren. She had dark hair like spilled ink and eyes that held the stillness of watching woods. She didn't cry much, just clung to Mara's shawl and studied everything, the dust motes in the sunlight, the curl of steam from a stewpot, Sam himself when he passed by her quiet as shadow. Mara asked for little. In the mornings, she swept the floors and beat the rugs clean with arms still sore from walking. She boiled water for washing, scrubbed clothes by hand, and hung them on the line where the wind caught them like flags. Sam offered her tools and space, but never instruction. It wasn't his way to interfere with a woman's steadiness. By the second week, she'd patched the curtains in the sitting room and built a small cot for Wren from scrap lumber. She stitched wildflowers into the quilt, yellow thread like sunlight sewn into fabric. Sam watched from the porch sometimes, eyes tracing the neat precision of her fingers, the way she whispered songs into the fabric as if it needed comfort too. When the snow returned, thin and sudden, they took turns stoking the fire through the night. Sam heard her footsteps when she moved to feed the coals, the quiet pad of her bare soles on wood. It surprised him, the peace of her presence, not a loud thing, just the slow reshaping of a life once hollowed out. He caught her once in the barn, brushing his old mare. She'd found the curry comb herself, stood barefoot in straw, speaking low to the animal like they were old friends reunited. The mare leaned into her, eyelids fluttering, and for the first time in months, Sam saw her tail swish in contentment. She was restless, Mara said without turning. So was I. Sam didn't answer. He adjusted the saddle straps on the rail beside them, fingers lingering on the leather. Her voice had been steady, but her back, straight as a rod, told him how tightly she held herself. Wren toddled by then, chubby fingers gripping the stable door. When she fell, Sam reached her first, lifted her as if she were made of porcelain and grief. The child didn't cry, just clutched his collar and stared at him like she remembered him from somewhere. "She likes you," Mara said, brushing hay from her skirt. There was no smile in her voice, just a note of surprise. Sam held Wren a moment longer than needed. Then he passed her back, gentle as snow. That night Mara cooked beans with salt pork, and they ate together by lamplight. Wren sat in Sam's lap, hands sticky with bread, her head resting against his chest like she'd claimed that space as her own. Mara didn't speak much while they ate, but when she rose to clean, Sam saw her pause by the window. Her eyes searched the darkness beyond the glass, a long gaze cast toward the distant fence line. He didn't ask what she was looking for. But the gate, he noticed the next morning, had swung partway closed. Spring took its time unfolding that year, as if the land needed convincing. The snow melted in fits and starts, leaving behind rivulets in the pasture, thawing the creek until it gurgled like something waking from sleep. The cottonwoods stirred, their branches softening, while crows returned to perch along the fence line, watching the house with dark, curious eyes. Sam took to fixing the north pasture fence while the ground was soft enough for posts. He didn't ask Mara to help, but she came anyway, sleeves rolled, boots thick with mud. She dug beside him without complaint, her breath clouding the chill air. Wren sat bundled in a blanket nearby, fussing now and then, her small voice rising into the wind like birdsong. They didn't talk much while they worked, only the occasional murmur, "Hand me that, deeper here, hold steady." But there was a rhythm to their silence, a give and take that grew easier with each shared hour. Sam noticed how she squinted into the wind the same way he did, how her shoulders stayed squared even when the post hole gave her trouble. One afternoon, a storm rolled over the horizon, sudden and sharp. They reached the barn just as the sky broke open. Rain came hard and fast, hammering the roof, washing the world into a blur of silver. Mara sat on an overturned bucket, rain streaking her face, though whether from the sky or her own eyes he couldn't tell. Wren slept in a blanket cradle of hay, her breath soft and even. Sam leaned against the stall gate, watching the water pool in the dirt outside. He could feel her watching him, too. "I had a husband once," she said, quiet but steady. "He didn't hit me, didn't drink, just stopped seeing me." Sam said nothing. When Wren was born, he left, said it was all too much, said he wasn't made for staying. There was no tremor in her voice, just tiredness, like she'd said the words to herself too many times to let them hurt now. "I kept waiting for him to come back," she added, fingers twisting in the hem of her skirt, "till I stopped waiting." Sam watched her a long while, rain tapping like memory against the roof. "I wasn't made for staying either," he said finally, "but I still do." Mara looked at him then, really looked, as if trying to see beneath his quiet. That night she left the lantern burning a little longer than usual. Wren dreamed with soft murmurs, her fingers curled around Sam's shirt sleeve as he carried her back to bed. In the dark hallway, Mara stood by the door to her room, hair damp, arms crossed. She didn't speak, but she didn't step away either when he passed. He nodded and she nodded back, that was all. The next morning, Sam found a mug of coffee on the porch rail, still warm. She never said she made it. And the gate, he noticed then, had not just swung closed. Someone had hooked the latch. The weeks that followed stretched long and wide like the plains themselves. The kind of days where time didn't tick so much as breathe, slow and full. Grass pushed up through the thawed earth, and wildflowers began to scatter their color across the hills, small and defiant. The house no longer echoed. It held footsteps, laughter in pockets, the scrape of spoons in bowls, a child's babble rising like birds in the rafters. Sam found himself waking early, not from habit, but from want. He'd step outside before the sun crested the ridge, listening to the hush before the world stirred. Sometimes Mara joined him, a blanket over her shoulders, Wren still dozing inside. They didn't always speak. Often they just watched the horizon together, two quiet survivors learning the shape of each other's stillness. One morning, he taught her to ride. She was wary at first, not afraid. He'd learned by now she didn't rattle easy, but cautious, like someone who'd learned too young that trusted weight. Sam saddled the old mare, speaking soft to both of them. He led her through the motions, mounting, holding the reins loose, trusting the horse to do what it knew. Mara listened, her mouth set, eyes narrow with focus. By noon, she rode on her own, hair catching in the wind, the mare's hooves kicking up dust like memory. Sam stood by the fence, watching as Wren clapped from her perch on a hay bale, her voice carrying on the breeze. He smiled, not with his mouth, but with something deeper, something long buried. Later that evening, he found Mara by the creek, skirts hiked above her knees, washing a pair of socks in the current. Wren played at the water's edge, building tiny cairns of stone. Sam crouched beside them, fingers dipping into the stream. "She's not afraid of anything," he said. Mara looked toward her daughter, then back at him. "Not yet." Sam nodded. He understood the weight behind those two words. "Do you ever think about leaving?" she asked after a while. "Used to," he said. "Now I think about staying." Mara met his eyes. The water sang between them, low and steady. That night thunder rolled in far off, a low growl behind the hills. Mara stood on the porch, hair loose down her back, watching the sky. "There's something coming," she said. Sam stepped beside her, hands in his coat pockets. "Storm." She shook her head. "No, someone." The next day, the tracks appeared. Just beyond the gate, boot prints fresh. Sam found them at dawn, the ground still damp with morning dew. They hadn't crossed the threshold, just stopped at the line, the toe of one boot brushing the worn earth where the fence post met the gate. He checked the latch, still hooked. When he turned, Mara was already watching from the window, Wren in her arms. He didn't ask, she didn't explain. But that night, he slid the rifle from behind the hearth and oiled it in silence, the firelight catching on the metal like it remembered what it was made for. And Mara didn't stop him. She only drew Wren closer and sat beside him, steady and unshaken. The house did not feel empty. It felt ready. The wind changed on the third morning, sharp and restless, stirring up dust like warning. Sam felt it in his knees before he saw anything, an old ache, dull and deep, like the land whispering of footsteps still too far to hear. He spent the day checking the perimeter. The fences held. The gate stayed shut, latch firm beneath his hand. But the boot prints had multiplied, circling in the dead grass just out of reach. Whoever it was, they knew the land or thought they did. They stayed outside the wire like it meant something sacred. Mara said little, but she moved through the house like a woman preparing a place for siege, quiet, methodical. She boiled water, jarred meat, packed a canvas sack with Wren's clothes. At night, she placed a knife beneath her pillow and didn't bother hiding it. Wren, for her part, seemed untouched by the tension. She played beneath the table, giggled in the bathwater, sang to the barn cats like nothing in the world could come for them. It was near dusk when the rider came. He didn't bother with stealth. The dust rose behind him, a long smear against the reddening sky. Sam stepped onto the porch before the hooves had slowed, rifle in hand, finger loose but ready. Mara appeared behind him, Wren balanced on her hip, silent and wide-eyed. The man rode up to the gate and stopped. He didn't cross. "You Mara." His voice was dry like it had forgotten rain. He was young, though his face wore a meanness that aged it, something brittle behind the eyes. Sam said nothing, neither did Mara. "I ain't here to make trouble," the man said. "Just want what's mine." Sam's thumb clicked against the rifle's safety, a small sound that echoed louder than thunder. Mara stepped forward, not far, just enough. "She's not yours," she said, her voice like flint against stone. The man spat into the dirt. "You got no right, walking out like that, taking her." "You left," Mara said. "That was your choice." The man's eyes flicked to Sam. "This your new man, that it?" Sam didn't flinch. He held the rifle across his chest, not raised, but not lowered either. The man laughed, cold and shallow. "You think hiding behind wire and a gun makes you safe." Sam's voice was low, even, "You're the one on the other side of the fence." For a moment nobody moved. The wind pushed through the grass. A hawk cried overhead, a sharp note of warning. The man turned his horse without another word, rode off into the darkening plain, the gate still closed behind him. Mara stood still for a long time. When she finally turned, her shoulders were shaking, but her face was dry. That night Sam lit the lamp and sat beside her. Wren slept curled between them on the couch, a warm weight in the hush. Mara didn't speak, but her hand found his, fingers rough and sure. They sat like that until the flame burned low. In the morning, Sam walked the fence again. This time, he found something tied to the gate post. A ribbon, blue, faded. Left behind like a promise broken long ago. The days turned golden after that, long stretches of sun that kissed the hills into bloom. The prairie came alive in color and movement, prairie dogs chittering at the fence line, hawks circling high, the steady low of cattle moving through the grass. Sam worked the land with quiet diligence, mending harnesses, planting rows of late beans, his shadow stretching beside him like a second self. Mara didn't speak of the man again. She didn't need to. Something had settled in her, deep and solid like roots taking hold. Her shoulders lost that flinch they'd carried. Her laughter, once rare and careful, began to show up unannounced, while kneading bread, while rinsing clothes in the creek, while watching Wren chase butterflies near the barn. Wren flourished like a wildflower, barefoot and sun-browned. She followed Sam now with a stubbornness he didn't mind, trailing him across the yard with questions that barely made sense but demanded answers all the same. He built her a swing from a low limb near the back porch, and she took to it like flight. Sometimes at dusk, he'd find Mara on that same porch, eyes on the horizon, Wren sleeping in her lap. Sam would join her, boots dusty, hands cracked from work. They wouldn't speak. The silence between them had changed. It was no longer a wall, it was a hearth, warm and breathing. One evening, after the first fireflies blinked into being, Mara turned to him. "I used to think love was something you had to chase," she said, voice soft and certain. "That it ran ahead of you, that if you didn't catch it quick, it disappeared." Sam didn't answer, he just listened. "But now I think it's something quieter, slower, like water finding its way through rock." She looked down at Wren, who stirred in sleep, one hand tangled in the hem of Sam's shirt. "You left the gate open for me," she said. Sam looked out over the field, where the wind played in the tall grass. "I reckon I did. And you knew I'd come through." He shook his head, didn't know, just hoped. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and they watched the sky shift from fire to indigo. No grand words, no promises, just presence, just choice. By autumn, the gate stayed shut most days, not from fear but from peace. Mara tended the garden with Wren at her heels. Sam built a smokehouse and added a second rocking chair to the porch. The house filled slowly with the sort of things that spoke of staying: a quilt over the back of the couch, muddy boots by the door, a drawing pinned to the kitchen wall in Wren's clumsy scrawl. Winter came again, softer this time, less like a threat, more like a season passing through. They met it with full woodpiles and canned peaches, a child's laughter echoing off the frosted glass. One night, as snow fell gently outside, Mara reached across the table and took Sam's hand. "You didn't save me," she said. "You let me save myself." Sam's grip tightened, just enough. "And you stayed," she added. He looked at her, his heart a quiet thrum. "So did you." The wind howled outside, but the house stood warm, its walls no longer hollow. He had built fences to keep the world out. But he had left the gate open. For her.